Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,
Hare Krishna, Dharma Pranam Prabhu. Please accept our humble obeisance.
Dandavats, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Vanshakalpatarupyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha paritanam bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namah.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. We are very grateful to you once again, Prabhu. It's another opportunity to hear from you. So all devotees would like to welcome His Grace Mukundat Prabhu, and we have been blessed by his association in the past as well. And as we have witnessed and we have seen that how Prabhu enlightened all of us on the deeper meaning of these verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, especially from Bhaktivedanta purport and also adding the commentary from the previous acharyas. So let's welcome all together Prabhuji in Kanyadesh, and we'll chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra one time. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Ram. Prabhu ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai.
Shri Prabhupada ki jai. So we'll begin. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayishva Bhatreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Krishne Swadhamo Bhagate Dhanamajnanadibhisaha Kalau Nashtratrishamisha Puranarko Dhunoditaha. This is Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 9, and we'll be discussing texts 14 through 18. So I will recite the text. We have very interesting sequence of verses. Sarvam kala kritam manye bhavatam cha yadapriyam sapalo yad vashe loko vayur iva ghanavalihi. That means, in my opinion, this is all due to inevitable time, under whose control everyone and every planet is carried, just as the clouds are carried by the wind. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder and Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Time is, there is control by time all over the space within the universe, as there is control by time all over the planets. All the big gigantic planets, including the sun, are being controlled by force of air, as the clouds are carried by the force of air. Similarly, the inevitable kala, or time, controls even the action of the air and other elements. Everything, therefore, is controlled by supreme kala, a forceful representative of the Lord within the material world. Thus, Yudhishthira should not be sorry for the inconceivable action of time. Everyone has to bear the actions and reactions of time as long as one is within the conditions of the material world. Yudhishthira should not think that he had committed sins in his previous birth and is suffering the consequences. Even the most pious has to suffer the condition of material nature. But a pious man is faithful to the Lord, for he is guided by the bona fide Brahmanas and Vaishnavas following the religious principles. These three guiding principles should be the aim of life. What three guiding principles? To be guided by the Brahmin and the Vaishnava, following the religious principles. If someone doesn't follow religious principles, we should be very careful about accepting his guidance. So one should not be disturbed by the tricks of eternal time. Even the great controller of the universe, Brahmaji, is also under the control of the time, of that time. Therefore, one should not grudge being thus controlled by time, despite being a true follower of religious principles. Om Jnanatimanantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuran Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Uttaparagamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate. Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhupya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Madgavira Bigopala Swikuryat Kripaya Yadi, Tadaiva Sampayaha Pitwa Hrishyeyus Tat Priyajnaha. Sridhar Swami points out for us here that the two verses beginning with this one, Sarvam, he dispels the grief of Yudhishthira Maharaj by dint of showing how it was fated. Here the word cha means api, even. So bhavatam api, even you have to undergo this suffering as a result of the time factor. It's all done by time, kala kritatvam. And here the word yadvasha indicates all those who are under time's control. Jiva Goswami does not comment on this verse. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, on the other hand, has very extensive comments, which we should hear. He raises the question, what is the cause of our suffering? And the answer is that it cannot be said, since I don't see either recent or prachin, old karmas, as the cause of your suffering. Therefore, Bhishma speaks in accordance with the popular custom. One might doubt that, time is simply the basis of experiencing happiness and distress, which is actually caused by prarabdha karmas. So when you say that time is the cause, time is merely acting as the agent. So why don't you just say clearly that our suffering is a reaction of our own prarabdha karmas? This is why he says, even you, bhavatam api. Sridhar Swami had mentioned here, bhavatam api, the word api, bhavatam cha in this verse actually means bhavatam api. That's very important distinction to make, because this is being elaborated here by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Even you have to suffer. And then Yudhishthira, he points out, Yudhishthira Maharaj is well known as the direct incarnation of Dharma. If Dharma himself has prarabdha karmas, then how can he have any sense of Dharma? This is another doubt. So the cause is actually not karma, but time. And that time cannot be countered and cannot be explained also. Nobody has any say over this. Here, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, all the acharyas, but Vishwanath most explicitly is pointing out, or he's alluding at least, to the achintya shakti of the Lord. This is a very important point. If even Dharma has to suffer the apparent reactions of adharma, then there's something inconceivable going on here. That's a very important point, which is elaborated in the next verse, so we'll move on. Text 15. Yatra dharma suto raja gadapani vrikodaraha krishnostri gandivam chapam suhrit krishnas tato vipat. What does it mean? Oh, how wonderful is the influence of inevitable time. It is irreversible. Otherwise, how can there be reverses in the presence of King Yudhishthir, the son of the demigod controlling religion? Bhisma, the great fighter, the great fighter with the club, and the great bowman Arjuna with his mighty weapon Gandiva, and above all, the Lord, the direct well-wisher of the Pandavas. It's a very good question. Srila Prabhupada writes in his purport, as far as the material or spiritual resources were required, there was no scarcity in the case of the Pandavas. Materially, they were well equipped. Because two great warriors, namely Bhima and Arjuna, were there. Spiritually, the king himself was the symbol of religion, and above all of them, the supreme, the personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, was personally concerned with their affairs as the well-wisher. And yet, there were so many reverses on the side of the Pandavas. Despite the power of pious acts, the power of personalities, the power of expert management, and the power of weapons under the direct supervision of Lord Krishna, the Pandavas suffered so many practical reverses, which can only be explained as due to the influence of Kala, inevitable time. Kala is identical with the Lord himself, and therefore the influence of Kala indicates the inexplicable wish of the Lord himself. There is nothing to be lamented when a matter is beyond the control of any human being. Sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, we can try to do our best. What does it mean to do our best? To do our best means to do our dharma. We should never do anything other than that. But in spite of doing our dharma, sometimes the Lord inexplicably desires for us to suffer. This is a fact. And we see it many times throughout the Bhagavatam, and especially in Mahabharata, Ramayana for sure. So many examples of this are there, that despite doing the best thing, despite being well guided, despite being sincere and without bad motives, sometimes a person just has to suffer anyway. And it's not even necessarily a question of prarabdha karma. It may be the inscrutable will of the Lord himself. This we can never know. That is the point of these verses, especially these first two verses. It is inscrutable. And we'll hear more about that in the following verses. But first, Sridhar Swami, he explains that this verse says, cruel fate creates impossible situations. This is something that if you're not old enough, you will certainly experience in due course of time. And if you are old enough, you have already experienced. We have a saying in English, what is that? Fact is stranger than fiction. Sometimes fact can be stranger than fiction. Stranger than surreal fiction, as a matter of fact. This is fate. Fate can produce in your life what William Shakespeare called the slings and arrows of outrageous misfortune. Slings and arrows of outrageous misfortune. Sometimes we find ourselves in circumstances that are just so outrageous. There's nothing you can do but fold your hands. I mean, we can, and to the extent that we are enjoined, we should try to better our situation. But ultimately, things are beyond us. The fifth factor of action, Ishvara, that is what has to be considered. This is described, of course, in Bhagavad Gita, 5 factors of action: the place, the endeavor, the time, the performer, like this. Ultimately, Krishna is above all of them, the action itself also. So this verse says, cruel fate creates impossible events. Here, Krishna, the word is used Krishna, but that Krishna actually means Arjuna. Arjuna had weapons, Astri, he's called, Krishnostri, Arjuna, Dhanvi. He had weapons and he had his arrow as well. These were Arjuna's strength. So, what does this mean according to Sridhar Swami? Even if you have divine opulence, military expertise, expert weaponry, physical strength, and piety, Prabhupada has also listed all these things in his purport. Still, you're going to have to suffer sometimes. Jiva Goswami says, this verse indicates that even if you don't believe that your reverses are fate, but rather affected by yourself, then why are they yours? Who wants to cause himself problems? Sometimes there are people like this, I don't believe in predestination, or I don't believe in fate, or I don't believe in some power beyond myself. But then why do you have to suffer, sir? This is the point he's raising. Very good question, and he doesn't even bother answering it because the answer is obvious. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, on the other hand, he immediately brings up a doubt, and from Srimad Bhagavatam. This is very nice. But Kapila Dev has said, this is 3rd Canto, chapter 25, text number 38. The Lord says, my dear mother, devotees who receive such transcendental opulences from him, the various modes of liberation, including sarshti, which is opulence that is comparable to that of the Lord or equal to that of the Lord, one can actually gain these things if one accepts them when the Lord offers. So he points out to his mother, Kapila Dev points out to Devahuti, that when my devotees receive transcendental opulences, they're never bereft of them. Neither weapons nor the change of time can destroy those opulences, because the devotees accept me as their friend, their relative, their son, their preceptor, their benefactor, and their supreme deity. They cannot be deprived of their possessions at any time. So this is a very strong evidence Vishwanath Chakravarti has garnered here to throw some doubt into the mix. So let's see how he resolves it. He says, how then could time attack the Pandavas who were filled with Dasya, Sakya, and Vatsalya for Krishna? This is most astonishing. Without a cause, time has produced effects whose cause we must infer, but which looks very similar to karma. He's very careful about choosing his words. It looks very similar to karma, but that doesn't mean it is karma. Looks can be deceiving. All that glitters is not gold. So that is the intention with which this verse is spoken. He points out again, Krishna means Arjuna with his bow. And he says, although you have strength of piety, physical strength, skill, scriptural knowledge, friends, and wealth, still you lament. So what is fated is likhidam api lalate pronsitam ka samartha. Hitopadesh tells us, whatever is written on your forehead, you cannot escape that, my friend. It's an indelible barcode. Only the devas can read it. You don't even know what the score is. But what is fate is going to happen, and there's no way around it. Therefore, the next thing he says is very profound. Bhishma Devu Vacha, Nahyasya karhichid rajan, puman veda vidhitsitam, yad vijignyasaya yukta muhyanti kavayopihi. Muhyanti kavayopihi. Even the great wise poets and sages, they're simply bewildered, trying to figure it out. Let's hear Srila Prabhupada's translation. O king, no one can know the plan of the Lord, Sri Krishna, even though great philosophers inquire exhaustively. Actually, to do very careful research, it can be exhausting. So even though great philosophers inquire exhaustively, they're bewildered. Muhyanti kavayopihi. They're simply bewildered, simply frustrated. Here, Srila Prabhupada writes a wonderful purport, many important points. The bewilderment of Maharaj Yudhishthir over his past sinful acts and the resultant sufferings, etc., is completely negated by the great authority, one of the 12 Mahajanas, or 12 authorized persons, Bhisma. Bhisma wanted to impress upon Maharaj Yudhishthir that since time immemorial, no one, including such demigods as Shiva and Brahma, could ascertain the real plan of the Lord. So what can we understand about it? Very, very important point. It is useless also to inquire about it. Even the exhaustive philosophical inquiries of sages cannot ascertain the plan of the Lord. The best policy is simply to abide by the orders of the Lord without argument. That is a hard pill to swallow, isn't it? We have such big egos and we're so impressed by our own intelligence. We think we can figure everything out, including what the Lord is going to do, but nobody knows that. Just like Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, what is that? Mam tu veda na kaschana. Nobody knows. I know everything. Past, present, future, what's coming, what's going, what's gone. Everybody I know, but nobody knows me. So this is the point. The sufferings of the Pandavas were never due to their past deeds. The Lord had to execute the plan of establishing the kingdom of virtue, and therefore his own devotees suffered temporarily in order to establish the conquest of virtue. Just like anytime you want to preach Krishna consciousness, it's always going to be a struggle. His Holiness Giriraj Swami, very respected senior devotee, dear disciple of Srila Prabhupada, he has written a wonderful book, The Juhu Story, about how that temple in Juhu, Mumbai, I'm sure many of you have gone there, all the trouble that the devotees, not only Srila Prabhupada, but the devotees who lived there, including Giriraj Swami himself, had to go so much difficulty just to make that thing happen. Sridhar Swami used the words, Durdakata Ghatana. The Lord is capable of effecting an impossible task. That was the case with that temple. Everybody discouraged Srila Prabhupada. But Srila Prabhupada, 30 years before, had seen that property and was inspired that I will build a temple here. Actually, later during the construction, it was revealed that there was already a temple, old temple on that spot. I think it was maybe Ganapati temple or something had already been on the property. Nobody knew. It was covered over until they somehow unearthed everything. But Srila Prabhupada had that inspiration that let this temple be there for Radhadas Bihariji. He invited them. They had to stay for many years in a corrugated iron shed for some time. And Srila Prabhupada promised that I will build you this temple, come hell or high water, as they say. And he did it. It wasn't one man's work. He took help from his disciples, and they all struggled so much. Anyone know what it's like to try to get to sleep at night while hundreds of mosquitoes are biting you because the place was in a mosquito-infested swamp when the devotees first moved in. Or when the rats are nibbling at your toes, or someone comes with an acetylene torch to try to burn the place down, even while the oddity is going on. Such demoniac opposition that devotees had to face there. You can read it about it. The Juhu Story by Giriraj Swami. Wonderful, wonderful book. But the point here is that it is never going to be easy to establish the kingdom of the Lord or to establish virtue in this world. It's never going to be easy because this is the world in which people come who want to get away from that. It is the prison of material existence. If you go to prison, you should not expect it to be a picnic. There are some very unsavory characters in prison, and I don't even need to mention what kinds of things they will do to you. Hopefully none of you ever find out. But this world is full of such people. We are criminals ourselves. That's something we also need to learn. And therefore, there's no point in us trying to speculate about what the Lord is up to next. Who are we? Even great pious sages and demigods cannot figure this out. So this is the point of this verse. Bhishma Dev was certainly satisfied by seeing the triumph of virtue, and he was glad to see King Yudhishthir on the throne, although he himself fought against him. Even a great fighter like Bhishma could not win the battle of Kurukshetra because the Lord wanted to show that vice cannot conquer virtue regardless of who tries to execute it. A very important point Srila Prabhupada concludes its purport with now. Bhishma Dev was a great devotee of the Lord, but he chose to fight against the Pandavas by the will of the Lord, because the Lord wanted to show that a fighter like Bhishma cannot win on the wrong side. Very important point. Yatra Yogeshwaro Krishno, Yatra Partho Dhanurdharaha, Tatra Shrir, Vijayo, Putir, Truva, Nitir, Ityadi. So this is the point. If we are fighting for Dharma, especially for Sanatan, Sadharma, then we will be victorious if we are pure devotees, if we are determined and surrendered souls. But if we are fighting for something else, we have to fail. Ultimately, it always works out in the Lord's favor. Madhvacharya, in his short comment on this verse, has a very interesting quote from Skanda Purana. Asangaschavyayo abhedyo nigrahyo ashosya evacha vidhosraganchito baddha iti Vishnu pradarsyate asuran mohayan devaha kridaya eva sureshwapi manushan madhvaya drishtya namukteshu kathanjana. What does it mean? Vishnu, without any mundane contact, undecaying. Vishnu he's without mundane contact. He's the undiminishing one. He is indivisible. He's inscrutable. He's cannot be dried up. This Vishnu is seen to be attacked by arrows, bound up and bleeding. On the battle of Kurukshetra, if we can skip ahead to Bhishma's prayers at the end of this chapter, and we can see that Bhishma is reveling in this sight. He loves this. This is his chivalrous, ghastly, actually, rasa with the Lord. He wants to see the Lord's beautiful, bright yellow silk dhoti stained with blood, transcendental blood, and with dirt upraised by the wheels of chariot, stuck to the sweat on his face. He wants to see the Lord in this condition. So Madhvacharya here is quoting a wonderful verse from Skanda Purana, and the Lord bewilders the demons by showing them this kind of darshan. And he shows the devatas his medium human-sized form, and he plays among them. He performs his leelas in this way. he does not show his wounded form to the liberated souls, that is to say, to the Gyanis or those in Shantarasa. They don't require to see that. Just like we were reading in the Bhagavatam, 10th canto, when Krishna killed Aghasura for the pleasure of his friends, Krishna did not show his small child form killing that serpent because he was in the mouth. And the acharyas commenting say the reason he didn't show that form is because there were no Vatsalya Bhaktas there to see it. So there was no necessity. So similarly, he doesn't show this wounded form to those who are simply concerned about Brahmananda or Gyan or Mukti alone. So but he does show this to Bhisma Dev because that is what Bhisma Dev desired. Whatever we desire, and at the time of death, if we remember Krishna, he will come to us in that form, the form that we always meditate on and cherish and hope to eventually rejoin. Krishna is so kind. Okay, Sridhar Swami writes here. Actually, I'm going to skip this because time is running out now. So, but Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has a wonderful report. He raises the question, so what am I supposed to do? Maharaj Yudhishthir May. Question, this is a general conclusion. Everyone agrees that no one can interfere with the plans of Krishna, and no one can even understand what those plans are. Even today, we've mentioned this already, no person, starting with Brahma and Shiva, knows the plan of the Lord. So what to speak of me? Maybe no one knows, he says, but inquiry is necessary. Srila Prabhupada, we just heard, he said that it's pointless even to inquire. That is true also. Still, inquiry is necessary. Does he want to give us suffering? Does he want to give us joy? Does he want to give us suffering, both suffering and joy? It can't be the first because then his quality of being affectionate to his devotee would be canceled. And it can't be the second option because we've not seen any happiness yet. This is the Pandavas speaking, we assume, because it's the plural. It can't be the third option, both happiness and distress, because that would be a contradiction to his kind nature. So it's finally decided that one cannot solve the problem by inquiry. So, as Prabhupada has also very kindly concluded for us already in his purport, the best policy is to simply abide by the orders of the Lord and remain his faithful servant. This is time and again, we find this conclusion stated in so many different ways throughout the Bhagavatam. Just like Brahmaji, when Brahmaji was bewildered, he thought, there are people who say they know about God, but I don't know anything. The best policy is simply to fold my hands and bow down to the Lord. So thus this verse says that even those who use their intelligence to discriminate and those who use knowledge of scripture are bewildered by their inquiries. There's some things you can never know. That is, again, as we said, the Achintya Shakti of the Lord. There is an Achintya Shakti, and that Achintya Shakti is in fact very prominent. This we have to know. We were discussing amongst God brothers a few days ago. There was an argument amongst God brothers, and it occurred to me that how do you solve an argument in which both sides are right and both sides are also wrong? Really, arguments very often, ultimately, they have to smash into the brick wall of Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, because there will always be X and non-X at the same time. That is the very definition of Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. And this Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva is the cornerstone of Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy. So at least among Gaudiya Vaishnavas, it's always going to be that way. So here we're talking about this Achintya Shakti. Srila Prabhupada many times emphasized that there's no conception of God without accepting his Achintya Shakti. This is a very prominent principle also in Jiva Goswami's Shat Sandarbhas. So in the very beginning, we mentioned that the Lord's plan is inscrutable, and it's being stated here in so many ways. Now, in text 17, Tasmadidam Daiva Tantram Vyavasya Bharatarshava Tasyano Vihito Anatha Natha Pahi Prajaprabho. That means, O best of the descendants of Bharata, Yudhishthira Maharaj, I maintain, therefore, that all this is within the plan of the Lord. Accepting the inconceivable plan of the Lord, you must follow it. You are now the appointed administrative head, and my Lord, you should now take care of those subjects who are now rendered helpless. That is the duty of the king. And by way of trying to console, as Sridhar Swami pointed out in his commentary to text 14, by way of trying to console Yudhishthira's grief, Shokam Varyati. This is his advice. Get busy, do your duty. People are suffering more than you. And you are here in this position by the inscrutable plan of the Lord, because this is what he wants to happen. Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. The popular saying is that a housewife teaches the daughter-in-law by teaching her daughter. Similarly, the Lord teaches the world by teaching the devotee. This is another reason why the devotees have to undergo suffering. The lessons learned hardest are the lessons learned best. And who can withstand the hardest lessons except for those who are the most devoted? It's counterintuitive to think that sometimes the Lord gives his best devotees the hardest time, but the Lord has a desire to fulfill. He wants that all of us be happy. And in order for all of us to be happy, this world, that there has to be preaching within this world. And who is going to preach if not for the devotees? Only the devotees can preach. No one else can do so. So that is the eternal onus that the devotees have in love of the Lord, a pact of love with the Lord. Especially Mahaprabhu's order is there for everyone born in Bharatvarsha. Bharata bhumite hoilo manushya janmajar janmashartha kori korapar. There's an order of operations here. He says, if you are born in India, then your responsibility, especially your responsibility, everybody's responsibility as a human being, but especially those born in India and hopefully socialized in a civilized manner according to Vedic tradition, then you have the obligation to do two things in order. One, make your life perfect. Understand Krishna consciousness yourself. Assimilate properly, fully Krishna consciousness. Practice it. When that is accomplished, then try to do good for others. The world is full of religious people who ignore this order of operations. Kramataha. As a rule of thumb, I would say a Ritvik is somebody who likes to speak more than he likes to hear. But it illustrates a principle that's applicable more widely than that. And that is that we're very focused on preaching because in some respects it seems easier to us than to really reform our hearts. So this is why Srila Prabhupada, if you read carefully his instructions, or if you hear his instructions, you will see that he always makes this point. We have to first become Krishna conscious, just like book distribution. His book distributors were always eager to share with Srila Prabhupada the scores of how many books they were distributing. And Srila Prabhupada quite often, more often than not, actually, it seems, he would respond that, okay, good. Are you reading the books? That's a big problem. In the modern world, nobody reads anything except for Facebook and WhatsApp posts. But at least we should be hearing something every day. Otherwise, what is the meaning when we sing? Guru Mukha Padma Bhakko Chitte Te Kori Aiko Arana Kori Homani Asha. What is the meaning of that? The meaning is hypocrisy. Pure and simple. That's another lecture, but here the point is that devotees, they're the only ones who can preach in this world, and they can only preach when they have really assimilated. This is the point. So once we have assimilated, that is to say, once we become real devotees, then the Lord is going to use us. And how is he going to use us? He's going to put us through difficulties in order to help other persons become real devotees as well. It's an eternal struggle. We signed up for it. You can opt out if you want. No, there's no force. This is love. But this is the bind of love that devotees have to take the Lord's order seriously, enough to assimilate and share whatever they've understood of Krishna consciousness. So the devotee doesn't, here Prabhupada writes, the devotee doesn't have to learn anything new from the Lord, because the Lord teaches the sincere devotee always from within. This is another point. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam. Priti purvakam. If we're full of love and we're doing our service in that way, sincerely, all the time, satatam, then the Lord is going to give us all the directions that we require. That is not, that's not tantamount to a license to ignore Srila Prabhupada's instructions to read his book, because then we would not be serving with love anymore. You cannot say that you love someone if you're disobeying that person, doing something that you know is displeasing that person. That's not service. That is disservice. And there are a few things only that Srila Prabhupada complained about his disciples. This is one of them, that they do not read my books enough. Another one is that they want to change things, in particular the Americans. ISKCON was mainly American in those days. Still, it's dominated by Americans for some reason. But that's the American disease, he called it. We want to just change everything. Passion. Change means passion. So, whenever, therefore, a show is made to teach the devotee, as in the case of the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, it is for teaching the less intelligent men. But again, somebody has to provide that example. A devotee's duty, therefore, is to ungrudgingly accept tribulations from the Lord as a benediction. We've already discussed, Srila Prabhupada has already discussed, that one should ungrudgingly accept whatever fate befalls one, whether that fate is actually karma or whether it is the Lord's own desire, we may or may not ever know. It's very difficult to know that. But this is the second time, I think, that he's used this word ungrudgingly. Accept tribulations from the Lord. That's another thing. We like to ascribe blame to someone other than the Lord. Oh, no, it's not the Lord doing this. It's so-and-so Prabhu, or this or that Mataji. You see? Actually, it's coming. Not a blade of grass is moving in the wind without the sanction of the Supreme Lord. We need to really swallow that, which is another hard pill. And furthermore, Srila Prabhupada writes here that we should accept this tribulation as a benediction. There is a silver lining here. We were talking about Kanavali, a line of clouds. Every cloud has a silver lining, they say. So there's always, even in suffering, there's great benefit sometimes, if we know how to call that benefit. The Pandavas were advised by Bhisma Dev to accept the responsibility of administration without hesitation. The poor subjects were without protection due to the battle of Kurukshetra. Look around the world. Just read the news and see how much suffering people are undergoing, or how mistreated they are everywhere, and abused and dissatisfied and suffering. Is it not the same situation that Krishna wanted Yudhishthira Maharaj to rectify? So what do we do in this circumstance? We have to become those agents of the Lord, as the Pandavas were, which means we really have to qualify ourselves for that first, as we've already discussed. So, they were awaiting the assumption of power by Yudhishthira Maharaj. A pure devotee of the Lord accepts tribulations as favors. This is the second time Prabhupada has said this, from the Lord, since the Lord is absolute. There is no mundane difference between the two. Mahaprabhu himself said this: you can embrace me or you can trample me. And who was it? Someone said, you can send a thunderbolt through my heart, or you can put your hand on my head. Devotees, they don't make a distinction. Pure devotees. Pure devotees. It's not so easy to do that. It's not so easy to come to that stage. So, here, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that you should discern that this happiness and suffering is dependent on the Lord. Daiva Tantram. Daiva Tantram. But understand that the purpose of giving happiness and distress to his devotees is not easily understood. That we can understand that we can't understand something sometimes. That's the best we can do sometimes. This is such a circumstance, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says. Sometimes you may not understand, but if the Lord's order is clear, then there's no question, there's no hesitation, there's no, what's that word Prabhupada was using? Begrudging attitude about it. So the Lord giving happiness and distress to his devotees is not easily understood, since it has already been said that his plan is hard to comprehend. But having discerned this, follow Krishna, tasya anuvihitaha, and protect the citizens who are without a guide, anatha. What does it mean to be without a guide? It is such an unfortunate situation. Srila Prabhupada spoke at this in Mumbai when he saw the dogs on the beach in Juhu. The rich people, corpulent rich people, and equally fat dogs, they would take the morning walk at the same time that Srila Prabhupada was walking on Juhu Beach. And these dogs are very confident, and they're very well fed, and they're very happy, and they're well exercised, and they're carrying on. And on the other hand, Prabhupada would point out in distinction the street dogs, scrawny, basically all Indian dogs are mutts. There's only one kind of dog in India, you know what they look like. So that dog is abused everywhere it goes, cannot find anything to eat, always getting picked on by the bigger dogs, and it's a hellish existence. And in this world, as a result of our own wrathful desires to exploit Krishna and to steal his property and to try to enjoy his multi-energies, we've ended up in this gutter, if you will, as a result of our own misdeeds. So when we finally have the seed of bhakti planted in our hearts once again, by the mercy of the Lord's divine grace, especially Srila Prabhupada, then we should have some gratitude. We're no longer anatta. We're no longer just being kicked about the marketplace like these poor street dogs, but many, many people don't have any protection. And these are the people that Krishna wanted Yudhishthira Maharaj to protect and to establish the authority of the Lord and his order within human society. This is an eternal mission, because with every generation that dies out, a new group of demons come and struggle to take charge. And a new group of devotees come to resist on behalf of the Lord. And ultimately, it always works out in the Lord's favor, but we should not expect it to be an easy path. In fact, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, those who are blessed by God should expect that their path is going to be beset with thorns every step of the way. Hope your feet have calluses. Text 18, change of gear a little bit different point being made here. Esha vai Bhagavan Sakshat Adyo Narayana Hattuvan Mohayan Mayaya Lokam Gudhasharati Vrishnishu. Very mysteriously, the Lord wanders through this world. He says, this Sri Krishna is none other than the inconceivable original personality of Godhead. He is the first Narayana, the supreme enjoyer, but he is moving amongst the descendants of King Vrishni, just like one of us, and he is bewildering us with his self-created energy. Purport. The Vedic system of acquiring knowledge is the deductive process. We just have a minute left, so I'm going to hurry. The Vedic knowledge is received perfectly by disciplic succession from authorities. Such knowledge is never dogmatic, as ill-conceived by less intelligent persons. Srila Prabhupada is very frank. You've noticed already, I'm sure. Less intelligent persons consider that one who is acting according to principles that are very clearly explicated and enjoined in revealed scripture, that is how they define dogma or dogmatic. But it's actually not so. The mother is the authority to verify the identity of the father. There's nothing else you can do. Even your DNA testing is not going to be 100%, although it's pretty good. The mother is the authority to verify the identity of the father. She is the authority for such confidential knowledge. Therefore, authority is not dogmatic. This is the difference. Authority is not necessarily dogmatic. In Bhagavad Gita, this truth is confirmed in the 4th chapter. And the perfect system of learning is to receive it from authority. The very same system is accepted universally as truth, but only the false arguer speaks against it. False arguer. This is very important. Srila Prabhupada told us, he chose these words very carefully. False arguer. The person is not really arguing. He knows. He's a false arguer. He doesn't want to accept. That's the problem. He's got his own program that he's attached to. And therefore he's arguing falsely. So the Prabhupada writes here, the false arguer only speaks against it. For example, modern spacecraft fly in the sky. And when scientists say that they travel to the other side of the moon, men believe these stories blindly because they have accepted the modern scientists as authorities. Really, think about it. I mean, nowadays, half a century later, there's actually quite a bit of skepticism about this so-called moon mission. And now they're talking about Mars, and China's got its agendas as well. And so, all these things, people accept them blindly. People are not so blind anymore, actually. Just like every day, the more you hear about these vaccines and the more aggressive pressure you feel to take your boosters and whatever it is, the more you kind of have to wonder what is driving these people. But anyway, a lot of people are very skeptical. But enough people believe these stories blindly simply because they've accepted these modern scientists as authorities, even though they don't often know so much. They make big mistakes and they hide evidence. That's another thing that our God brother Dhruta Karma Prabhu has very kindly pointed out for the world. All the examples of anomalies that don't really fit into the accepted paradigm. They're swept under the rug, they're buried, they're hidden away or denied. So authorities speak and the people in general believe them. What do you call this? Goat. What kind of goat? Clueless goat. Sheep, we say in America. So even if they accept them, they give a different interpretation. I'm sorry, I've gotten ahead here. The authorities speak, people in general believe them, but in the case of Vedic truths, they have been taught not to believe. In a public sphere, if there is some controversy and you support it, whatever side of the controversy you take, with reference to Vedic literature, how far are you going to get? People have been trained to reject any authority as quote unquote dogma. Srila Prabhupada has already explained this. Or even if they accept them, then they give some different interpretation. For example, all of our friends, impersonal friends, Brahmavadi, Mayavadi friends. Yes, this Narayana Parovyaktat, but it doesn't mean that he's actually beyond this material world. They give some newfangled interpretation. They try to screw out of Vedic truths. So each and every man wants a direct perception of Vedic knowledge, otherwise they foolishly refuse to accept it. And you can't always have a direct perception, at least not in the beginning, unless you're willing to surrender, because Krishna does not reveal himself to anyone. Even you don't have to accept a friend request on Facebook. So Krishna doesn't have that right. So this means that the misguided man can believe one authority, the scientist, but will reject the authority of the Vedas. Actually, our definition of theism and atheism is different than the dictionary definition. This we should know. According to the dictionary and popular usage also, one is a theist if he accepts the existence of God, and an atheist if he does not believe in God. But according to Srila Prabhupada, one is a theist if he accepts Vedic authority, and he is an atheist if he rejects Vedic authority or doubts it. That's a very important point to bookmark. So, Srila Prabhupada is therefore pointing out here, this means that the misguided man can believe one authority, the scientist, but he will reject the authority of the Vedas. The result is that people have degenerated. This is a very practical analysis. If you get God out of the picture, if you reject the Vedas, what happens? You go to hell. Even here and now, your life quickly descends into chaos. And so does the world. That is why the world is in the state that it's in right now. Well, the only reason. People want the kingdom of God without God. Or as we said the other day, people want Prabhutva without Prabhu. So this is the unfortunate situation which Krishna wanted Yudhishthira Maharaj to rectify. And only Yudhishthira Maharaj was able to do that. Someone else maybe would not have had so much success. So these two things that we were explaining before, the person has to be qualified to represent the Lord, and then the person actually has to do so. Two different but very equally important things have to go on, and Yudhishthira Maharaj was uniquely qualified to do that. So people degenerate when Krishna is shoved out of the picture in public life in general, worldwide. You can't really mention God so much anymore. People look at you funny. It's increasingly the propaganda is there that God's not allowed. And it's often only implicit, but it's nonetheless palpable. So here is an authority speaking about Sri Krishna as the original personality of Godhead and the first Narayana, Bhisma Dev. Even such an impersonalist as Acharya Shankar has said in the beginning of his commentation on the Bhagavad Gita that Narayana, the personality of Godhead, is beyond the material creation. The universe is one of the material creations, but Narayana is transcendental to such material paraphernalia. Bhishma Dev is one of the 12 Mahajanas who know the principles of transcendental knowledge. His confirmation of Lord Sri Krishna's being the original personality of Godhead is also corroborated by the impersonalist Shankara. All other acharyas have also confirmed his statement. And thus there is no chance of not accepting Lord Sri Krishna as the original personality of Godhead. Bhishma Dev says that he is the first Narayan. This is also confirmed by Brahmaji in the Bhagavatam 10:14.14. Krishna is the first Narayana. In the spiritual world, Vaikuntha, there are unlimited numbers of Narayanas who are all the same personality of Godhead and are considered to be the plenary expansions of the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. The first form of the Lord, Sri Krishna, first expands himself as the form of Baladev, and Baladev expands in so many other forms, such as Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, Vasudeva, Narayana, Purusha, Rama, and Narsingha. All these expansions are one and the same, Vishnu Tattva. And Sri Krishna is the original source of all plenary expansions. This is a big topic. We don't have time anymore because we're over time already. But if you want to learn more about this, you can read the Laghu Bhagavatamritam of Srila Rupa Goswami, in which this is described at length. All the different multi-forms of the Lord, how they manifest, what their positions are, etc., etc. The whole Taratamya, you can say, of the Lord's expansions. So, he, Krishna, is the creator of the material world, and he is the predominating deity known as Narayana in all the Vaikuntha planets. Therefore, his movements among human beings is another sort of bewilderment. Yes, Manushakriti. He's appearing to be like an ordinary human being. Nato natyadharo yatha, Kunti Devi says, just as an actor on the stage. He's acting the part of an ordinary human being, but he's not. He's actually the original personality of Godhead, the source even of Mahavishnu, what to speak of others. So the Lord therefore says in Bhagavad Gita that foolish persons consider him to be one of the human beings without knowing the intricacies of his movements. The bewilderment regarding Sri Krishna is due to the action of his twofold internal and external energies upon the third one, called the marginal energy. That would be us. So we are bewildered. Sometimes we're influenced by Yoga Maya, sometimes we're influenced by Mahamaya. Lately, we're all more influenced by Mahamaya. So, the living entities are expansions of his marginal energy, and they are sometimes bewildered by the internal energy and sometimes by the external energy. By material energetic bewilderment, internal energetic bewilderment, Sri Krishna expands himself into unlimited numbers of Narayanas and exchanges or accepts transcendental loving service from the living entities in the transcendental world. I wish we had more time to discuss all the ramifications of this wonderful information that we gain by divine grace only here in the Bhaktivedanta purports, but we have to finish up. So, and by his external energetic expansions, he incarnates himself in the material world amongst the men, animals, or demigods to reestablish his forgotten relation with the living entities in different species of life. Great authorities like Bhisma, however, escape his bewilderment by the mercy of the Lord. I think maybe I should stop now because I'm conscious that we're going over time. So I'm going to ask people if they have any questions at this point or any comments. If there are none, we can go on and see what some of the acharyas have said, but it's already pretty late. So at least for me, it's late. So would anyone like to ask anything or make any comments?
Raise the hands. I'll just unmute. Mataji, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam, Jai Shri Prabhupada. You had mentioned about, Krishna. So the whole, all the verses talked about Krishna being the cause of the devotees' distress. But we also see, as Kunti Devi mentions, that when Krishna gives them distress, he stays with them. He's very closely monitoring them, he's with them. So my question is, does Krishna stay with us also? When, even though our distress is not caused by him, it's caused by our karma, but does he stay with us? Because it's hard for us to it's not palpable, at least in our condition, but does he stay with us?
Very well stated question. Yes, it's not palpable in our present condition. Actually, there's no difference between the difficulties that the Lord gives his pure devotees and the difficulties that he gives us. There is no difference. We will understand this when the layers of fog have been dissipated from our intelligence. It's the same mercy. If you think hard about this, just extrapolate. The Lord is giving attention to his innumerable devotees, parts and parcels, only to exchange love with them. And it doesn't really matter whether we're in the spiritual world or whether we are in the material world. From his part, he never does anything else. He never stops that. It just continues. He has to change his tack only, depending on the attitude that we adopt, depending on the level of forgetfulness that we embrace. Then he has to change his strategy only. But his attention, the quality of his attention and the motivation behind it never changes. So there really isn't a difference. Krishna is giving the pure devotees difficulties, and Krishna is also giving us difficulties, but in both cases, it's just a loving mother. Sometimes a loving mother has to chastise the children, and they learn something. Or, as Prabhupada has already pointed out, when we get a little older, more mature, then the mother has to teach the younger children through dealing with us. It is the same thing. Koi fark nahi. Is it clear?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you so much, Prabhu. As always, Prabhu, you enlighten all of us through wonderful commentaries, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, in the 14th verse, you mentioned about that, and we read that about the Kal Shakti, that how is inevitable time. And we also hear in Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto and 5th canto, how like Krishna, when he creates the Kal Shakti and Jiva Shakti, the two things which agitates the Mahatattva, like that comes. And we also quoted the verse from Bhagavad Gita that Adhisthanam Tatha Karta, the 5 things which is for any successful activity. So there also we don't see the role of the Kala. We see the role of Kala in the creations and the annihilation, mainly what we perceive from the scripture. So how we understand that this is the cause of the suffering, and because it's an activity, like we hear on Brahma Samhita also, Karmadi Nidhati Kintucha Bhakti Bhajam, that everybody is bound, they are bound by their karma. So the role of Kala, how can we understand, Prabhu, in our perspective? Currently with the karma.
I mean, there's absolute time and relative time that has to be considered. Absolute time comes into the picture when we become conditioned souls, when we decide to entertain something separate from Krishna and are consequently blessed with material existence. Material existence has to be measured in terms of mundane time. So that's one thing. Time is created by us in that respect. It only exists really in this material world. In the spiritual world, it's eternal time, which is a different thing. But even within relative existence also, time remains as powerful as it is inscrutable. And for that reason, Srila Prabhupada he mentions it in different ways. He mentions cruel time, he mentions inexorable time, he mentions, the inconceivable time. So, talk to a Jyotish, a good Jyotish sometime about time, and you can get some realizations about this. Time is it's a great mystery in either world you look at it. In the spiritual world, in spiritual life, time is mysterious because there are some things, as we've been discussing, that we'll never know or understand. Even in the material world, within the realm of things that we can understand, time still remains elusive, and it's very difficult. Drummers also know about time. I don't know if I'm answering your question. This is what's coming to me at the moment. Is it okay?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you, Prabhu. So it will be late for you, Prabhu, in India, and we are really very grateful to you, Prabhuji. In spite of your busy schedule, you always accept our invitations and give associations to all of us. And it's very, very helpful to all of us, Prabhuji. So from the core of our heart, हम सभी मिलकर प्रभु जी का धन्यवाद करेंगे महामंत्र और वैष्णव प्रणवाद के द्वारा। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे